Kralj, the father of Slovene modern art, was born on the 26th of September 1895 in the most beautiful place on earth, in Zagorica Dobrepolje. Before he started elementary school in Videm in 1902, his horizons stretched from his home and his grandmother's house to the vibrant, bustling village and on, over the fields and meadows in the sun, under the clouds and moon, and the stars as far as the ridges of the hills embracing Dobrepolje and the Church of the Holy Cross in Videm. Later in life, Kralj painted this old village as a winter motif with an eloquent dawn, the shimmer of infernal flames on the horizon. The landscape presented itself to him as a reclining female nude. Here everything concerning humanity acquired its traits of exuberance as well as repulsion, while nature in its awesome magnificence provoked sublime intimations of horror and a safe haven. At home, Kralj discovered his father's forgotten youthful carvings, which aroused in him a feeling of the sacredness of art. With the encouragement of his teachers, among them also Fran Jaklič, a literary and political figure, his initially playful efforts evolved into a creative vocation. In 1906, Kralj went to Ljubljana to attend the Secondary School of Arts and Crafts to study to be an artist, a calling that evoked in his contemporaries sympathy for the young man, as well as fear of the magic power of creativity. At that time, the school was located in the Virant House and the Stična Mansion near St. James's Church. Teaching the craftsmen were the first-generation academy-trained sculptors and painters, Alojzij Repić, Josip Vesel, Ivan Zajec, and Celestin Mis. Ideologically, they adhered to sturdy academic realism, updated with the modern conceptual elements of symbolism and the formal solutions of the then popular turn-of-the-century style. Kralj acquired a rudimentary artistic education there, learning about the past glory of art and copying famous works by even more famous Renaissance masters who were presented as the ideal. Before enrolling in the sculpture department of the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, Kralj spent a year in the Klagenfurt studio of Alojzij Progar, honing his skills as an assistant to the master sculptor. He worked on altar sculptures, restored works, and made carvings of his own design as well as fake famous sculptural motifs, an activity that proved quite lucrative. Having successfully passed the academy entrance exams and been granted financial support by the provincial government, the young Kralj stayed in Vienna from 1912 to 1915. Then he was enlisted and sent to the South Tyrol front, where he was wounded. After recovery, he was posted to the hinterland. The professors of sculpture at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna were followers of the trend of the theoretically reformed doctrine of realistic sculpture founded by the eminent sculptor and theoretician Adolf von Hildebrand. Particularly representative of it were their monumental works in the center of Vienna and in the setting of architectural historicism on Ringstrasse. In 1918, Kralj resumed his interrupted studies and in 1919 graduated with flying colors. Later, he would assess his Vienna student years as a period of critical confrontations and comparisons of his own work with the endeavors of his fellow students. He devoted a great deal of time to studying art history and thinking about the role and significance of tradition. His understanding of it reached far beyond the dictates of the academic aesthetics. He was interested not only in European but also more remote world cultures and, of course, in the formal solutions of modernism and the avant-garde. His first public appearances while still a student in shows at the Richard Jakupić Pavilion in Ljubljana immediately after the end of the First World War drew a great deal of critical attention to his drawings, paintings and sculptures. After Vienna, he went to further his painting studies in Prague, an attractive Central European center imbued with the triumph of national freedom and an openness toward everything modern. The studio of the painter Vlaho Bukovac, where Kralj attended postgraduate studies in painting until 1920, was a very conservative institution. Professor Bukovac was considered a legend of Croatian and Central European painting. In his youth, he had developed an enthusiasm for the allegoric compositions of academic realism in the circles of Paris salon masters. At the turn of the century, he cut a swathe for modernism with plein-air painting and a naturalist faithfulness to detail together with similarly minded artists and artists' groups in southern Slavic cultural centers. In the post-war period, he thus literally embodied the past, pioneering artistic glory of the particular brand of Impressionism that had evolved in Central Europe, which turned, also due to Kralj's revolutionary formal tendencies, into a simple fact of history. After 1905 and the advent of the avant-gardes, Fauvism, Cubism, Expressionism, Impressionism represented only a swan song of tradition. Also in Slovenia, it was considered the official form of modernism with mass appeal, as it were, also long after the disintegration of the Sava Club, which united the foremost Slovene Impressionist painters such as Richard Jakupić, Matija Jama and Ivan Grohar. Following his first group and solo exhibitions, the critics assessed France Kralj's work as the most radical form of modernism. His creativity opened up a new chapter in Slovene art, Expressionism. In it, there was startlingly reflected an artistic transformation of the world, its spiritual basis, philosophical principles and aesthetic purpose. Kralj's Expressionism verged on an abstract art based on formal simplifications and transformations. With color symbolism and rhythmically dynamic compositions, the artist translated his perceptions of the world into images of fantastic forms, reflecting visions with roots in the unconscious, mental pictures, and inexhaustible formal ingenuity. The distorted, anatomically altered figures with intertwining organic forms and geometrized spatial elements give Kralj's sculptural works the previously unimaginable expressive power of dynamic matter, evoking the artist's intent in design and his experience of physicality in harmony with emotional excitement and sensual palpability. His drawing is refined to simplicity, synthetic, melodically flat, and with prominent, sharply contrasting surfaces. Kralj's production triggered divergent responses. Faced with unfamiliar, previously inconceivable works, the viewers often reacted with unease and uncertainty about the loss of reality. It seemed as though the visible in a painting, sculpture, or drawing was disappearing from the horizon of culture. Naturalism, with its commitment to being true to nature, had fostered the myth of perfect artistic creation which proved the existence of truth. Kralj's diversity of themes and his representations of related subjects in different media, drawing, painting, sculpture, made him an artist who reached far beyond the boundaries of the local artistic horizon. Conceptually based on an aspiration for generally human ideals and rejecting any references to glorious past artistic achievements, Expressionism soon grew into an intellectual movement of the young in all spheres of artistic creation: architecture, fine art, literature, music. In Slovenia, it introduced an up-to-date intellectual perception of art in what was a state cultural milieu. With an eye to the future, Kralj took up the initiative in 1922 and organized the Klub Mladih, the Club of the Young, which he headed for half a decade. Kralj, together with his brother Tone and Veno Pilon, also represent the acme of artistic achievement of that period. With exhibitions at home and abroad, he promoted the view of art as being a highly democratic institution, unencumbered by any ideology, national, social, cultural, or political. The principal demands of artistic production were the ethics of freedom and faithfulness to one's subjective view of the world. Kralj's complex personality can be discerned in his intellectually astute character, resolutely critical mind, ironic distance to values, his own views and aesthetic principles. His endeavors resulted in a series of anthological achievements, canvases, bookworks, sculptures, reliefs, murals, and public monuments. Many concepts and ideas for drawings, paintings, and sculptures from this period went on to be the starting points for subsequent innovative formal solutions for works that belong among the fundamental masterpieces of Slovene 20th century modernism. After the turmoil of the early 1920s, the middle of the decade saw an apparently calm period of stabilization and reconciliation of otherwise constantly smoldering conflicts in the volatile social reality of the time. In 1925, France and Tone Kralj staged a survey exhibition of their work at the student center Akademski dom in Ljubljana. It was accompanied by the very first illustrated fine art monograph in Slovenia, with a text by the preeminent Slovene art historian Dr. Franz Stele. The exhibition was clearly a turning point in their creative development and an opportunity to again gauge the spiritual resonance of the Slovene cultural space against the art trends in Europe. At that time, France Kralj was immersed in exploring, problematically and critically, the possibilities of a modernist representation of traditional subject genres, portrait, group portrait, landscape, still life, in painting and sculpture. He placed emphasis on an intimate, explicitly subjective and only apparently classic expressive poetics, consistent with the style of Neue Sachlichkeit, or New Objectivity. New Objectivity aimed to re-evaluate academic high art. In order to overcome the prejudice of the eternal truths of classic art, the artists rendered traditional motifs and genres in a contemporary fashion and expressed their own current existential experiences. Artists transformed everyday scenes into a semantically more universal, new artistic reality. Classic art thus passed from the hands of social elites, which saw it merely as a means of ideological manipulation and an instrument for pedagogical moralizing and intellectual snobism, and became the property of the democratic institution of art and a vehicle of personal expression. In the new circumstances, Kralj's painting and sculpture again took the leading role amongst his contemporaries and attracted the attention of the international artistic community in the cultural centers of the formerly Common Empire, and in particular in the Central European cities of Vienna, Prague, and Berlin. As a result, Kralj was invited to take the post of professor at the Technical Secondary School in Ljubljana. He founded and headed the ceramics department and taught sculpture until the school was shut down in 1945. In addition to working as a teacher, Kralj continued his artistic career, boldly experimenting, exploring the possibilities of various artistic and formal approaches, and broadening his thematic, expressive registers. When necessary, he would also get involved in the sphere of organized artistic activities, so that the artistic groups that had been established at his instigation, Club of Young Artists, Slovensko umetniško društvo, Slovene Artistic Society, Slovenski lik, the Slovene Form, could remain independent and preserve their intellectual freedom from the pressures of daily politics. Without any obvious dramatic changes, Kralj's painting evolved into an expression of a mature sense for refined psychological dynamics. This is apparent in his choice of intimist subjects from family life and his personal mythology conjured up by his artistic imagination and based on vivid memories from his youth. Color expression was replaced by tonal modeling, with exposed refined drawing tracing the simplified lines of the body, depicted in nuanced transitions between contrasts. He was engrossed in the constructive aspects of pictorial compositions as a way of expressing the overall subordination of detail to the whole to overcome the randomness of chaotic reality. He created a specific visual and experiential atmosphere on the surfaces of his canvases, complementary to the expressive current of his chosen subject. He dedicated equal care and attention to biblical iconographic motifs, psychologically profound portraits, the peasant genre, and panoramic landscape motifs. His powerful creative nature stamped each subject with a sense of permanently seeking the essential traits of the visible world and a profound experiencing of his environment. An artistic visionary, he masterfully introduced his own psychological character into his works, at the same time revealing man's existential ties to the world and remaining an advocate of freedom in a spiritually constrained environment. For him, the artistic act was a gesture of creative spirit and the result, an apparition no more substantial than reality itself. Kralj's representative new objectivity, painting and sculpture reflect the Platonic superiority of the spirit over everything material. At the same time, a precious collection of fist-sized terracotta sketches was taking shape in his school workshops. In them, the sculptural material, clay, preserved a sensual erotic physical charge. With apparent facility, spontaneous kneading led to ingeniously designed sculptural compositions, outstanding in the dynamic corporeality of intertwined couples. Quite casually, there would emerge genre subjects, mythological figures, likenesses of saints, unusual plastic forms with perforations, rhythmic concave and convex shapes, smooth and rough surfaces, shining and matte glazes. These works are not exalted high art. Their content is irrelevant. What stands out is the process of creation. The meaning of the works radiates from their self-sufficiency, from the persuasive power of the modeled object, completely useless except in its intimate expressive dimension. With such examples, Kralj encouraged also his students to be free and independent when seeking new forms and choosing ways of expression. This part of Kralj's creative oeuvre, against the dark historical background of the 1930s, is time and again experienced as a silent witness to unfaltering human dignity at a time when, parallel to the overwhelming ideological exclusion, also the aesthetic standards dramatically declined into courting the popular taste. Not surprisingly, therefore, Kralj, with his original creative temperament, which incessantly forced him into formal renovations and critical assessment, found himself under attack from his colleagues' narrow-mindedness and faced a Hamletian dilemma. I myself deceased, perhaps, and the world health itself? As always, Kralj searched for answers within himself and, encouraged by a narrow circle of intellectuals, decided to write the first ever Slovene autobiography of an artist, entitled My Way and published in 1933. In this literary gem, the artist outlines his world of ideas, sums up the results of the artistic endeavors of his generation, and declares his aversion to vain bourgeois self-complacency, alienated institutions, bureaucratic opportunism, and intellectual depravity. This work so masterfully presents the multi-layered character of the time and space Kralj helped create in art that it can read as a daring confession, a philosophical essay, a theoretical analysis of artistic creation, a sociological study, in short, pure creativity capable of moving from the sphere of visual media into the world of words, with a critical take on past actions and insightful intimate premonitions. We could almost call it a manifesto. In it, Kralj countered the hypocritical taboos with untarnished sensuality and joyous eroticism, refusing to hide behind the higher ideals which served many individuals and organized groups as an excuse for violent supremacy. Kralj's voice of reason, crying out in the backwater of discriminating social passions and creative paralysis, triggered harsh reactions, equally harsh as those that led the world into a clash of ideologies at the end of that decade, with apocalyptic consequences. In painting, Kralj returned to color in that period, a sophisticated tissue that subjugated into a means for introducing a sensitive emotional charge, into the emphatically drawn outlines in representations of explicitly intimist subjects. Scenes such as The Next in Line, portraits of the children of the artist's family, My Wife Against the Venetian Background, The Nude Bather, a motif from the canvas Bathers, St. Anthony and a Peasant Couple, are masterpieces that emanate a sense of permanence. The momentary is transformed into a meditative serenity, the banal everyday life becomes a ritual timelessness, and a dreamlike vision is captured in an apparent physicality. Close-up realistic forms become abstract brushstrokes. Only what seemed to be an artist's illusion could be transmuted into a clear notion, an intimation of real life concealed behind the veil of the visible. Color found its way also into Kralj's sculpture, becoming an immaterial membrane that divested the otherwise primary and heavy forms of their material elementariness. Kralj made a crucial step forward in his thinking about sculpture at that point. From perceiving sculpture as an object in space, he went on to realizing that a sculpture defines space and is, in its semantic dimension as an object or several objects, mother, child, bird, book, turned inwards into the abstract interspace encompassed by its individual components. In this way, it alerts the viewer to the fact that a sculptural object is not a thing thrown into the world, but a small world unto itself, all its own, regulated by its own laws, a point of view determined by the artist's perception of the world. Critics, art historians, and also his fellow artists often had difficulties with Kralj's intractability and vagueness, his obstinacy, his rebellious and defiant nature, his extravagance and simplicity, humility and pride, and above all, the sense that he paid very little attention to various beliefs, and even less to celebrated heroics. For this, Kralj cannot be held solely accountable. Toward the end of the 1930s, the municipality of Ljubljana bought his sculptural composition entitled simply Peasant Motif at a show in the Jakupić Pavilion and placed it, as if randomly and following its own judgment without so much as notifying the artist, on the edge of a park in the center of Ljubljana. This was done at a time when there prevailed in the world and also in Slovenia, in sculpture the myth of the classic Mediterranean beauty, imaginary conceptual nobility and formal superiority. In painting, monumental historical painting, and in architecture, the cold luxury of public buildings. Everything resembling simplicity, relaxed forms, understated subjects, or containing even a hint of humor or irony, was rejected as unworthy of art. And this is what Kralj's peasant motif was: an interesting sculptural composition of an unembellished mother with a baby in her arms, a docile animal, a cow, next to her, and a sheaf of wheat tossed in the foreground, a block modelled into falling cascades. In it, the artist brought to life such tender notions as motherhood, love, the codependence of man and nature, beast and man, mother and child. With this work, that was not an allegory, but an ode to new birth and life and creation, the artist did not eulogize the town authorities or the almighty state with a young prince on the throne, or the Stalinist utopian paradise, or the Nazi thousand-year empire. And it was this work of art that was used as an excuse for a showdown with degenerate art, for a shameful demolition of the sculpture, for a newspaper campaign against the artists with warnings and threats in the name of the illusion of the ideal content and form of academic realism. This was what Slovene culture presented the artist with. On the occasion of his exhibition in the Jakupić Pavilion, with which he celebrated his 20th anniversary of appearing in public as an artist. The act was a brutal attack on the artist and his personal artistic dignity, an attack that would have crushed a lesser man, but not Francesc Kralj. When the worst was over, he was literally creatively reborn thanks to his rebellious nature and boundless vitality and creativity. In the dire circumstances during the Italian and German occupation and the Red Terror that followed, Kralj never gave up. He made hundreds of tiny oils on canvas, cardboard, burlap, wood, glass, for the most part no bigger than an envelope. The paint was applied with thick impasto strokes, exuding an almost palpable confidence of the brushwork and resulting in astounding, expressively charming and daring color solutions. He took his subjects from the personal mythology of his world of imagination and biblical scenes of genre features, captured endless horizons in sections of landscapes, arranged in compositions humble, wonderful, blooming wildflowers or grasses, always growing, never picked, and sought in imaginary boundless landscapes freely moving nudes, bolting cows and neighing unbridled horses, anything that was alive and free, that spurred on his lust for creation. During the war in 1942, when the survival of his family was at stake, he accepted a commission from entrepreneur Anton Drobnic to make two monumental works, a modelled relief and a carved stone angel from the Last Judgment, for the Drobnic family tomb at the Vidum Cemetery. The composition is a fantastic vision of the human comedy. Under a semicircular arch, there meet heaven together with its supreme representatives and this world. In the timelessness of the artist's utopian creation, the forebears meet their descendants. From unrelated fragments of the past, Kralj composed a mosaic of the simultaneous presence of the persons depicted, which seems like a cosmic view of something almost minute from this perspective. A tiny piece of earth and a segment of history, when space becomes a dynamic sculptural plane and time the all-encompassing gaze. Not only in its material, cast concrete, but also in its sculptural approach of relaxed modeling, free composition and formal distortions that verge on caricature exuberance, this work is reminiscent of the approach employed by Kralj in the destroyed peasant motif. These characteristics point to a tendency towards simplified, essential formal and semantic accents. The work retains its character of an open and fresh sculptural composition, devoid of stylistic mannerisms, equally topical and attractive in its narrative unobtrusiveness as at the time of its origin. Kralj spent the 1950s in utter isolation, which does not mean, however, that he waited passively in the wings. Penetratingly as ever, he observed from a distance the ideological currents of a world torn asunder by the Cold War, produced artworks, and between 1954 and 1957, again dedicated himself to writing memoirs and travelling. Sober and both, concerned and uncompromising, he saw repeated everywhere the fruitless patterns of ideological and political intransigency which suffocated creativity in all its forms. In the spring of 1952, an exhibition of French modern art staged at the Moderna Galleria Museum of Modern Art in Ljubljana made him feel as though he had awoken from the nightmare of the grey socialist everyday into a world to his liking. The overview of French art from Impressionist to contemporary was organized by the French National Museum of Modern Art as a traveling exhibition that toured all the cultural centers of Yugoslavia. The curators selecting the works accurately gauged the political climate in the post-common form Yugoslavia and primarily included in the show moderately modernist works by French masters. The presentation was conceived as a comprehensive overview of art from the first half of the century. In truth, it did not include many genuinely innovative or challenging works. Kralj paid attention primarily to the plurality in the selection of artists and works, which witnessed to the vividness and variety in the stylistic and conceptual starting points of French modernist art. He was enthusiastic about the broad selection of expressive poetics, a thing he sorely missed in overview and other exhibitions at home, and whose absence indicated how closely the guardians of the communist cultural artistic dogma watched also the work of curators in museums and galleries. The following spring, the Moderna Galleria opened a permanent exhibition of works produced since the beginning of the century from its collections of painting and sculpture. Some works by Kralj were also included in the survey. The artist could not make sense of the absurd fact that although his work formed part of the National Collection of Modern Art, he himself was financially barely scraping by, so in May 1953 he decided to hold a public protest in the rooms where the collection was displayed. At home he made paper strips with his protest demands and admonitions that the authorities responsible should take into consideration his long years of creative endeavors. He attached the strips onto his exhibited works and demonstrated there until the arrival of a representative of the museum. The latter amicably listened to him, expressed his understanding for the artist's plight, and promised that the museum would do what was within its power to alleviate his dire situation. This soon happened with the purchase of some of Kralj's works. The reaction of the forums Kralj's other demands were directed against was to simply ignore them. Next, a selection of Kralj's woodcuts from the late 1930s was included in the survey of Yugoslavian graphic prints presented in the Yugoslavian National Pavilion at the 1954 Venice Biennale. Overview historical exhibitions would show time and again the substantiality and originality of Kralj's oeuvre and confirm his status as one of the crucial representatives of modernism in Slovenia. A retrospective exhibition of his work at the Moderna Galleria in 1956 was again met with enthusiastic acclaim. His works from the mid-1950s were proof that the artist's creative powers had remained undiminished and, most importantly, again made manifest his up-to-date expressive poetics and masterful originality. In addition to painting, Kralj devoted himself to the monotype. The impasto application of paint onto a polished surface makes the employed pigments both the material and a convincing means of expression. With his instruments, the artist imprinted in these works the manuscript of his conscious creative mind, his constructive ideas and emotional and aesthetic impulses, and then printed the creative images onto hundreds of translucent sheets of tissue paper until the very end in 1960. France Kralj's consciousness of himself as the father of modern art in Slovenia is closely related to the historical events, trends in art, and mankind's rises and tragic falls in the 20th century. With his magic creative gesture in sculpture, graphic art, and painting, he augured, even as a young man, the death of the genius of the dead past. In return, he helped to mold creative freedom for the spirit of the artistic genius, with his artistic representations of intimate experiences that inextricably remain a part of ourselves.